Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the board, and Mr. El-Kubi. That was an excellent presentation and certainly a good segue into the next part of the presentation. And if you saw that chart, this will speak to how, should the board wish to, you move from that tier 2 to tier 3, I think it was, in the site readiness, at least as it applies to the Upper Mag West portion of the property. Just to give a quick recap, I don't know that I need to remind you guys of this, but this is a active rezoning request that was again initiated by the board. Approximately 2,400 acres, divided into two cases, the east case and the west case. You have the numbers there. This is before the Planning Commission now. So no action asked of the board today, just a high-level update. But please, if we cover anything, interrupt me, ask questions. We have staff here from all the community development departments. So if there's anything you need, we have folks that can answer those questions. But this is really intended to be a high-level update of kind of where we've been, where we're headed, and bring you up to date on the workings of the case. So speaking of that, we've had several meetings over the last few months. Started off in September with just an introduction of the case as it pertains to really the schools projects. We did touch a little bit on the west property, but nothing in great detail. An extensive presentation on December 16th here in the public meeting room, followed by a work session with the Planning Commission on the 21st of December. And then a couple of different meetings, one with folks virtually on January 6th, with residents, mostly of Westerly and Summer Lake, another one on the 13th in person, with some of those same residents, but predominantly folks that live kind of on the Duval and Mosley area, very well attended. And then last week, a long 2.5-hour work session with the Planning Commission, where we really did a deep dive into all of the aspects of this case and generated a lot of really excellent conversation. That was the first time that we had talked through a lot of the proffered conditions, as well as gotten into detail on the traffic impact analysis. One of the things that I did want to point out on this particular case is that staff is working through it and recommending conditions to the EDA, who are the ones that are actually proffering those as the owners of the property, as well as the agents for the ones that are also included in the case that were added by the board. I think it was in October. Did want to note that based on this timeline, and I'll cover this again, the earliest that the board would have their public hearing on this case would be in April. So through those two community meetings, we've really heard, I'll call them 6 primary issues. There were a lot of things, a lot of really excellent input, and we certainly appreciate the community coming out and really, having a lot of energy around this project. So I want to touch on each one of these, briefly and discuss kind of where we're headed. We will go into detail on these a little bit in the meeting that's scheduled, I guess it's next week. And then even deeper into it with the Planning Commission. In between now and then, we will likely meet with individual planning commissioners to make sure that we are working through these in a manner that they will support. We've started having conversations on what we believe are solutions to some of these issues. But again, those are going to continue. This is a work in progress, and we're committed to again, trying to address the needs and the requests of the community the best we can. So number one is buffers. This has come up extensively, particularly as it pertains to the acreage lots that are kind of in the Mosley area. So off of Mosley Road and Duval. A lot of folks moved out there. They have anywhere between, some of them are as small as 2, but up to dozens of acres of property. And they have, the ones that front on Mosley have really requested significant buffers from the site so they could protect that more rural lifestyle. Originally, we had, the ordinance would recommend 100-foot buffers. We are in agreement that that's not enough from those areas. Those folks have requested something akin to 750 feet. We are actually going back and looking at what that would do and creating a map that would show the distance from each occupied home to where that would be, that 750-foot line would be. Just in some preliminary glances, it looks like that may be something that we could accommodate. but we will work through that. I will say we also have a small group of us are meeting with one particular resident, I guess it's tomorrow. For example, we'll do this with him at once too. We will walk that line into the woods. I'll put on my heavy coat and boots and pull a tape, and we can mark where the 100-foot line is, 200-foot line is, and even 750, so that we can, get an idea in the field as to what that looks like, what these folks would see, and ensure that we are adequately buffering any development from those particular properties. Because I think that is important to recognize that these folks moved out there and they want to keep that lifestyle that we need on our end to make sure that we're doing that to the best of the ability without, completely hamstringing the development of the property. In terms of uses, there are two that have really cropped to the top as ones that the community has expressed concerns about. And we'll get into these a little bit more detail as the presentation moves on. But those are the plastics manufacturing and the pharmaceutical manufacturing. So those are two uses that the community has expressed some significant concerns are. We have some ideas on how some of those concerns would be mitigated. Mr. Carroll, speaking with Mr. Owens, he's come up with some really good ideas that we're going to consider as part of the case, and we will continue to work through that. We'll touch on that a little bit more, again, as the presentation moves on. Number 3 is Westerly Parkway, and this is something that was really brought up in the meeting with the residents of Westerly and Summer Lake, but predominantly, again, by the residents of Westerly. The initial traffic impact analysis, some of the early analyses indicated that there would be a need to widen Westerly Parkway from its existing 2-lane configuration to 4 lanes. A lot of that was generated by the traffic that would be generated by 3 schools in one particular spot. So if you recall, the east case includes development of a middle school, high school, elementary school, a library, and then 600 residential units. The high school alone generates about a third of 10,000 daily trips. So it's a fairly significant generator. That really dovetails down into number 4 there, which is the number of schools. What we've done is, as we've looked at this in an effort to accommodate some of those requests and try to keep Westerly at 4 lanes, we've had discussions with schools over whether or not the high school could be relocated to a different location within either the Upper Magnolia Green East or West boundary. I think those preliminary discussions indicate that is a good possibility. So assuming that moves forward, it's very likely that Westerly Parkway would be able to remain as a 2-lane road based off of those traffic analysis. Once you distribute the traffic from the 2 schools, being just the middle school and elementary school, it's much less. So you don't necessarily need to widen that to the 4 lanes. So we think we have a plan there that will work, and so far we think that everyone is supportive. But again, we will continue to dive into these as the project moves on. Number 4, I think we covered briefly, just the idea of having 3 schools on one campus. That's a lot, and when you look at the diagrams, it was also a lot of impacts to wetlands and waters of the U.S. So by really taking that campus and just providing 2 schools, not only does it reduce the traffic and then the subsequent number of lanes required on Westerly Parkway, but it also reduces the impact on the wetlands and waters and other environmental features within that particular area. So we believe by doing that's a good win. Now still more work to do to figure out exactly where the high school should go, but nothing that's insurmountable when you're talking about a 2,000 plus acre project. We should be able to find a spot to put that will work. Number 5 is the timing of the construction of the north-south road to Duval Road. Again, some of this was really brought about because of the number 3 there, the Westerly Parkway concerns, and number 4. The community has made it clear that there would be a preference to see that road built sooner rather than later. So I think to the degree we can, what we're going to do is work to find the right timing for that. We do currently have folks looking at, number 1, how much that would cost, and number 2, how long it would take. It is a long extension. It's about a mile, and it includes a major creek crossing. So it's not a light project. but certainly one that we're going to try to get more granular into in terms of the timing, so that that second access could be provided to the school's campus and to the other facilities there. I think what we've said heretofore has been that the middle school, because it's going first, would likely for some time period be served through Westerly Parkway, with that second north-south road to be provided shortly thereafter. I think we just need to figure out that timing and work with Mr. Harris, the folks at our CIPN, to figure out when that could happen. And then number 6 is a desire for continued community engagement. And certainly this is one that has come up before on other projects. Mr. Engel, the Carvana project, for example, in your particular district, there are conditions with that case that require us to send noise studies, just as an example, to 2 particular homeowners associations that are in very close proximity to that case. I know as that project has moved on, we've actually had some very good conversations and meetings with the residents out there, and been able to work through a lot of those issues as the site has been developed and as the site has been cleared. So certainly there's a model to follow there, and I think we will present some options relative to suggested conditions for the EDA to consider more community engagement as the project moves forward. And I'll pause there. Any particular questions on those issues that we've heard from the community to date?
Board members, any Mr. Carroll?
Mr. Chair, well, I certainly think that covers a lot of the east side.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we'll get to some of the questions on the west side later.
Yes, sir.
I'll probably have some follow-ups.
Okay. Yeah, and again, some of the issues on the west side were around number 1 and 2, the buffers and the uses. I think that's fair to say. And then we will cover some of those kind of towards the end of this too. So, but again, if there's something that you all need more information on, we're happy to provide that.
Mr. Smith, as we have listened to, particularly, so I was a part of the Westerly meeting and then also a part of the Mosley Road meeting thereafter. Certainly one of the items we heard a lot about was traffic on Westerly Parkway and just concerns about a lot of trips. So what I'm hearing you say generally on this side, on this zoning case, is that by moving that high school, we're going to eliminate a lot of that traffic to the point where that expansion of Westerly is just not going to be required. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. That's what we're looking at right now. Just ballpark, the high school represented about a third of those trips. By removing it from really that part of the case, that takes a lot of those peak hour trips. And this is not a dig at high schools, but they just do generate a lot more traffic than some of the other ones. They bring teens, they bring drivers, they also bring teen drivers. So it's an interesting development, and one that we understandably folks have some concern over the impacts.
Well, I want to thank staff for working that issue out. It sounds like it's moving in the right direction. So
yes, sir. We believe that that's the right solution to accommodate that. Again, and on some other maps, I could show, a little bit in terms of if folks have questions where we're trying to look to move the high school. But again, we're having those conversations in conjunction with school staff, and we believe we can find a location within the boundaries of either the east or the west, or possibly even both.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Mr. Carroll.
One of the other things that was brought up by the community, certainly from some of the people that I've spoken with in Westerly, is besides the increased traffic flow on Westerly Parkway, it's the type of risk that the increased traffic flow can present to the community, present to the children that live in that area. And I know that, as an example, the playground is actually towards the front of the subdivision as opposed to in the rear. And one of the things that we've talked about, and I think it's important to point this out, it's being considered, is an underground walkway, which could go under Westerly Parkway as we proceed to build the new section. That would allow for people to walk under the road as opposed to walk over the road, which would provide a much safer way for them to cross, even as opposed to putting a crosswalk, for example. And so I think that's certainly a concern that the neighbors have out there. And I also think, and you're probably going to get to this later, but with the road network that we're talking about adding to this, it also adds a level of connectivity to Horner Park, which I'm assuming that's later on in your presentation.
You know, if it makes sense, I'm happy to touch on some of that now. I'll see if I can work the fancy pen. So this is Westerly, is right here. And Westerly Parkway runs kind of right in here and would be extended to serve the school site. The middle school was originally intended to be kind of located here, based on, again, these are conversations that are happening this week. So just keep all that in mind. We're trying to work this out. We're looking at least schools is considering moving it kind of more up to this area. Number one, it's more proximate to infrastructure. Number two, that's has less impacts on wetlands and some of those other environmental features we discussed. To your point, Mr. Carroll, there is a low point that runs kind of in this area, and I'm ballparking this stuff. So what we've suggested is where you have that low point and the drainage structures, think big pipes, culverts, that sort of thing. That would be a great spot to put a grade separated pedestrian crossing to serve folks. It would be both close to Westerly as well as allow those folks to access the fields and other facilities at the school. I know I would live within about a half a mile of an elementary school. On nice summer days, we walk there all the time to go to the playground, use the fields, those sorts of things. So the idea would be to provide the very same sort of thing, give those folks connections to the amenities at the school that are safe.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Mr. Carroll.
I think also one of the things that the neighborhood was interested in is also, like I said, connectivity up to Horner Park. And I think I want to make sure I'm right that we are having discussions of actually connecting a road that southern connector that would come from Duval up, eventually ties in with Westerly Parkway, and then eventually tie those roads north up to Horner Park, which would allow for not just pedestrian but also vehicle traffic to be able to have access, which would also alleviate traffic flow on the Otterdale Road side of students wanting to come in to actually get into the middle school, if I'm correct. And so it adds more mobility and connectivity to that particular part of the county. And again, I just want to make sure the community knows that that is something else that's being considered because of community input.
Yes, sir. That's absolutely fair. I'll use this map because I think it's appropriate to show that. So this is the approved master plan from, it's hard to believe, 1991 was 31 years ago now. But you could see on here, this was Westerly Parkway back then. Obviously, all of this is now homes, but there was a plan to, again, carry it to the west. And then what we're going to look to do is now, to your point, tie it up to Horner Park and really provide better access there, as well as something that would run up here, but still not entirely different from what was originally planned back in 1991. So I think that's those are good adds, and as we move forward with this, we can try to refine those roads and those alignments to provide more connectivity to really what's an underutilized access or asset.
Question generated from that discussion. Westerly was trying to get from one side to the other, and we looked at putting that connection under the road up closer to the school. Would we be looking at a sidewalk on both sides of the road, and what would the length of that be so that somebody, if they wanted to make that, what would their...
Yes, sir. So typically, we would want to provide pedestrian connectivity to the facilities. There is sidewalk on one side of the existing Westerly Parkway through Westerly. I think that's a conversation we'll need to also have with the community. I think from a staff perspective, there's a goal to just leave them exactly like they are. There are buffers there. We heard in one conversation that, for example, the grassed area that they have there, their children ride their bikes there. So, I think part of the conversation, part of the desire is just to leave them untouched. If we were to go back and retrofit sidewalk, that's going to have impacts.
I'm just trying
I think it's
to
just
figure out
something
how
we need
they
to
would
look
be
at.
by moving it all the way up there, which I understand why it makes sense, but to cross over and then not have an access back to the park, to the playground, or vice versa, it doesn't seem to. Where would that go to? Like if you put the walk underneath the road, where would it go to?
Right, yeah, so we would have to ensure that there's a connectivity to the other facilities, yes, sir. So we'd have to look to see where folks would cross within Westerly, that sort of thing. So, yeah, more work to do.
And to follow up on that, Mr. Chair, I think the answer to that question too, as far as the connectivity side, the sidewalk that they currently have on the left-hand side would end up terminating when it gets back to the school location. And so sidewalk on the other side would continue forward along the road wherever it traverses to, and that would also give access up to Horner Park. But I do agree with your point that it would be productive as well to have a sidewalk that would come back at least towards where the playground is. Or we'd have to consider maybe moving the playground somewhere else. Those are conversations to have with the community and as this project moves forward.
Chairman,
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Holland.
actually, I have two questions. One is regarding biking, and we have a bike and trails chapter in the comprehensive plan. How has that been factored into this plan, given, all the work we put in the bike and
Sure.
trail
Yeah, no,
chapter
that's a great
of comp
question.
plan? That's one question. Go ahead and answer that, and now.
Sure.
Second.
And I'll see if I can just use one of these these maps here. So you can see on here, Mr. Holland, that there are several of these greenish blue areas. Essentially, the bikeways and trails plan follows some of those lower lying areas. So there are plans to try to accommodate development of a bikeways and trails plan in accordance with what was adopted by the board as part of this development.
Okay, very good. Thank you. And secondarily, in item 2, you mentioned uses that were being recommended against. What were those two? And are those the only two at this point in time?
I think
from the community.
Sure. I think the two that have really drawn the most interest from the community are really the plastics manufacturing and the pharmaceutical manufacturing. That's not to say the other ones have not drawn some interest, but those are the ones that predominantly folks have said, hey, I've got some concerns over those two particular uses.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith.
Sure. Just as a reminder, this is the entirety of the subject property. The stippled red is what was originally in the case, and then the green areas are what was added in October. Again, most of this the county purchased and then conveyed over the EDA. I did want to speak a little bit to the initiation of the zoning itself, because that has come up as a question. It was a case that was initiated by the board, so there's always questions of, is there an application, and if so, what does that look like? We have posted all of that information online, but staff entered it into what's called our, it's through an Excel portal, but it's enterprise land management, so it's all electronic. If folks want to see what that looks like, they can create an account and log in and search by the zoning case to actually see what the back end looks like. But we've tried to make it easier and have located everything on the website for this particular case if folks want to see the details.
And that's the same process that any applicant in the county would go through now. That's relatively new, but it's not different than any other.
Correct, yes. Everything's entered online now. It's through that online portal, whether it's a building permit application, zoning application. We have tried to make things easier for folks so they can do it from home and, pay fees, all that online. Yes, sir.
If we could just talk about the process for a minute, just a little more.
Mr. Engel.
Thank you. So we went through, we approved putting in the application, we put it in. And whether it's us or any other person or entity that comes through to start a case, they would do the same thing
Yes, sir.
to start their case. And then they would go and they would have community meetings to develop their case. And through that input with the community, they would more than likely make some revisions to what they were thinking based on input that was given back to them. And then they may end up having another community meeting or not, depending on where they end up through the process. And then they would say they're ready to move forward. When they're ready to move forward, that's when staff generally does a staff report, correct?
So
When the applicant says, we feel like we're ready to go ahead. This is what we want to present. We've had our community meetings. We're ready to announce this for a public, to go to the planning commission. That's when the staff report would be generated, typically in a normal case, correct?
Yes, and that process is done in conjunction with the planning commission. I think that's the other important part of this. Typically before a case is advertised for its first public hearing, which is at the planning commission, there needs to be buy-in from the commission that this case is ready to be heard. And that's what's happening with this one. I think you saw, if you sat through the entire 2.5-hour presentation with the commission, fairly clear that it was not ready for prime time.
I think they're still asking for another meeting to finish meeting with some of the departments.
Yes. So Steve Donahoe, who sends his regrets, he could not be here. I'm trying to do my best impersonation of him tonight. Has had lengthy discussions with all the commissioners, and I've got that in the presentation to cover what their particular input is and what we will be working on with them over the next, 60 days or so. Because again, the February meeting, it's not on the public hearing agenda for that. So the earliest at this point the commission would have their public hearing would be March. Supposing that they move it on to the board after that point, y'all would hear it in April.
And this, because the board has initiated the case, has probably brought more light to the sausage making of a case than some of the other cases, and it's caused some confusion because, quite frankly, just because we put in an application doesn't mean we have a case that we're ready to present to the planning commission, whether it's us or any other applicant. It means that we've initiated the process, which is then community meetings, revisions, possibly another community meeting, possibly more revisions, until the point where everybody says, okay, we think we're now ready to go to the planning commission, which then has a public meeting. Mm-hmm. And then they make a decision on how to recommend the case to us. And then the case comes to us, and then there'll be another public meeting before we make a decision. And that process is, quite frankly, a normal process, but the sausage making, most of the time, there's not a lot of issues going on with cases, so you don't have a tremendous amount of involvement. Sometimes the community does have a little bit more interest than others. In this case, it's definitely a large case that covers a lot of property, and I think that people felt like, our citizens felt like we were initiating a case that was already done when we brought it to them, and that because we were the applicant, there was no changes that would be made to the case or that could be brought forward. And I just want to make sure they understand the process so that they can understand that their input does matter. It is being taken into consideration, and it is being looked at as we look at buffers, possibly sound proffers. I know in the site plan, you can't have more than a half candlewatt of light at the edge of the property, but lighting is, which is normal. It doesn't necessarily need to be proffered, but it may give people more comfort that they're not going to be looking into some city right next to them, because the standards of a site plan today don't allow for that. But many people don't understand that. So by putting some of those things into the case and making it so that citizens can see what that case would actually look like, understand that, look at pictures, understand what types of buildings may be put up based on the whatever we end up with as the proffered uses. Quite frankly, I-2 just sounds bad. I mean, if you're somebody that lives in the country and they're not used to having industry next to them, by proffering those, whatever we end up with, if, I'm sure at some point the case is going to move forward and it's going to have some condition proffers in there on what the uses can be. And I think that working together to make sure that they understand what that means and how that would truly affect them, and not just some of those things may have legitimate environmental concerns, others with today's standards may not. So I just don't think we've done a great job of communicating all of that, but that's part of this process. And really, that's the part that I think causes the most confusion to the community, is they don't, they want to see all of that in the very beginning, and that's not the way a normal case develops. But it is the way a normal case appears before any public meeting at the planning commission level or at this level. And I think it's important to say we are listening. I am very much concerned about some of the issues that have been brought up. I don't know that they can't be overcome, but I do have concerns, and as it moves forward, I think we need to just be very transparent, share that with them, and ultimately make sure that they know that they are actually part of the process, and that just because we initiated this process doesn't mean that we brought a case that was completely finished and isn't going to have any changes, because I think that has also been a concern of many of the citizens, that whatever's going to happen is already done, and that is actually not true. And I just want to make that point.
Yes, sir. This case is going to end up vastly different from where it started at the very beginning. In my mind, the board gave staff a homework assignment to rezone the property to accommodate a technology park, 3 schools, a library, a few other things. It's our job to bring you all a good case after we hammer it out with staff, commission, the community, everybody else. So the idea is that, by the time it makes it to you all, it's in good shape.
I thank you, Mr. Smith, and my colleague, Mr. Engel, because I do think this is very important to understand that in every single conversation, every single email, every single meeting, we are listening for issues, and then I know our planning commission and staff is working to mitigate those issues that are mined from those conversations. So this is meant to be an iterative process, and what that means is we have a draft and we have discussion, and we have a draft and we have a discussion until there's a product that both the planning commission and our board can in turn evaluate. And so each comment is valuable, and we appreciate every citizen coming out and giving us their input, because it only makes the case better at the end of the day. And so just like anything else, when you have input, you usually will have a better product than you would at the outset. So, Mr. Smith.
Mr. Chair, so on this diagram, you can see just the boundary of the 2 cases. In the purple is what we're calling Upper Magnolia West, about 1,700 acres for a technology village. In the orange is Upper Magnolia East, which again is intended to be for either 2 or 3 schools, library, and no more than 600 residential units. Just while we're here, because I do want to, again, I think that just helps people understand what we're talking about, that we are working on these things. One of the spots that we've looked, we're considering, well, perhaps the school could fit down here, just as an example, south of Duval Road, and then you don't have, again, the impact of 3 schools kind of in this particular area. Again, nothing finalized, nothing fully determined, but I think it helps for folks to understand that we are looking at those sorts of issues, and it's again, to your point, it's a work in progress. So there's lots of other people involved, not just on the county side, but on the school side, that would need to vet that. So some of this just takes time.
Mr. Chairman, real quick.
Yes, Mr. Carroll.
In relation to that, if we do move the school, then I would hope that that's going to require us to do an updated traffic analysis to determine if we do move the high school down there, how that affects the previous site and how it'll affect the new location and the roads around that new location. I'm assuming that's something we would get started on once a decision is made.
Sure, we'll have to take a incremental look at that, Mr. Carroll. That's a good point. timing of certain road improvements, other things as it pertains to that particular facility. That's all very fair.
Mr. Chair, sorry. But,
Sorry, Mr. Engel.
that brings me to another point as well. The traffic studies, I know, thank you. The traffic studies
It's
that
like
we've
tennis
seen
up
so
here
far
sometimes, but that's all right.
have all been based on the Powhite extension being completed, is that correct?
The Powhite extension has to be built in order for Upper Magnolia West to fully develop. That's absolutely true.
And so, but all of the traffic studies that we have at this point are based on that happening, correct?
Yes, we did not envision a scenario where that was not built. Again, for the west, I'm not sure that we could even make that work with absent that.
Okay, I just, because this case without the Powhite going all the way through would defeat a lot of what we need to do for that area, because the Powhite needs to be able to give relief to Hull Street. And this project could be the catalyst to make that project available, and that's important to talk about. But outside of having the Powhite extended all the way through and making the improvements to allow Hull Street to have some relief, this project, again, I believe the Planning Commission said that without that road, it would be catastrophic to the area. So we just have to make sure that as we look at this, we look at phasing, we look at proffering what can happen and what can't happen. Just because we have a zoning on it doesn't mean that it is available to be built on immediately without other things taking place if we proffer that correctly.
Sure.
Jesse, if I
Dr. Casey.
So, Mr. Engel, to your point, one of the items I think that is worthy of its own standalone work session, and we were going to try and do it today, but we couldn't work out the timing arrangements with our VDOT friends, Shane Mann and Rebecca Worley, but we like to bring them to a work session in February. Again, this is before the case goes through Planning Commission public hearings, just so for the informational update, again, of these major roads in Chesterfield, a little bit of the history and scope, Chippenham, 288, the extension itself, what's RMTA's role for these types of roads, what has been VDOT's roles, what have been tolls, and what's the mechanism of tolls and when they may be expiring because the bonds are satisfied. So a comprehensive exercise, but also then going back to a little bit of the homework assignment that I said that we need to do regardless about the zoning case, and that's just how can the Powhite Parkway be extended even to serve the people that are there today and the units that are already approved there today. And again, one of the challenges is when it is just residential, right or wrong, state and federal partners are not necessarily there with you, nor is maybe even CVTA-type calculations of regional priority projects to warrant that investment, which again lends the fact to what could otherwise be a road that, if it was to be built sooner, would be a higher tolled road or a longer duration of tolls. And so again, we're going to work out a lot of that information, just to summarize it, if you will, for the February or so work session, but that's not the end of the homework assignment. We're going to need to probably hire some experts in the field of major road construction, partner with VDOT, hopefully, and such experts, for them to bring back, again, the answers to that. So all we hope to do with the zoning process, if you will, is to, again, as VDP had mentioned, to have them hopefully be at the table with the $150 million type topic that was referenced. We liked, with our new federal representative, Representative Whitman, that's a good ally, I think, on this type of project. And I know that we're going to try and work with him and brief him on Chesterfield County. And again, right or wrong, when it's just a residential discussion, you can't get those folks to the table. So I just wanted to reference that. The other thing, and I hate to go backwards a little bit, but for the school, for the sake of transparency, as I mentioned even in my comments, Tomahawk Middle School is a priority regardless of the zoning process. So what we want to try and do is try and position a middle school site sooner than later, so we can at least design and spec out that site so that we can begin a procurement process, a bid process. And again, we can make all the disclosures in our procurement documents that it's subject to rezoning, but we have issued the bonds for it. I think that the will of the board is there to construct a site somewhere amongst this area. But again, in fairness to those that are bidding on it, they need to know where the dirt is that they need to build. But again, they can begin the homework assignment of scoping out the project so that we don't start the process at the conclusion of a zoning process. We're already maybe in the midst of receiving documents.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, yes, Mr. Carroll.
Speaking to that, because we're taking into consideration moving to high school, I think at one point, I think there was discussions about shared facilities between the high school and the junior high school, but because we're going to move the high school to a different area, we already have a model in place and the design in place from previous schools that we've used, so that'll save money because we won't have to pay for a new design to be done. Now, we'll still probably spend the money on the back end because we won't have the shared services between the high school and the middle school when we look at, although we already have a model design for a high school, but we may have to build additional facilities such as what would have been shared, like an auditorium and such. But as far as the design goes, that's ready to go.
Mr. Carroll, in discussion, and again, this is all happening real time, so you're exactly correct. There's a template designed for that. The challenge that schools is running into now is obviously when you move it, and I'm just ballparking this stuff from, here over to here, topography changes, some of the site work package has to change, so we're trying to work through those issues with them now. Again, this is something that's happening in the last few days, so it's all just getting worked out, but certainly every effort is going to be made to stick to that 2024 timeline.
I just wanted to make that clear so that the community that's watching, and I'm sure there's many people watching today, are getting all of this updated information. I think it's important.
Mr. Engel.
Go ahead.
So again, Upper Mag West, about 1,700 acres, rezoning. The current underlying zoning, again, is for about 1,300 residential units. This would rezone it to allow for the technology village, and we'll get into what those exact uses would be in a minute. But just, again, wanted to show you kind of where that is. And also point out on this slide, you can still see here that we are showing the 100-foot buffer. I did want to, if I could kind of sketch it up, there are homes kind of dotting these areas. So what we've done is pulled a 750-foot line from some of those, and we will create a map that shows where that is. And again, if we need to meet in the field and put flags in the property itself to show people, well, that's where that line actually is. It'll be trees for this amount. It'll be, no buildings for this amount, that sort of thing. Those are the details we need to start working on. But we are certainly very sensitive to the fact that there are homes along here, and these folks moved there for a specific idea of having a more agrarian lifestyle, and we want to mitigate the impact on that. So those residents on Mosley, we are certainly cognizant of that this is a significant change. Again, this just shows you the entirety of the property. I don't think you really quite understand how big it is until you try to drive around it or you try to walk through it. But it's very large just geographically. You can see that the totality of this is bigger than Lower Mag in its entirety. Maybe even you need to pick up even the Wood Lake property. So it is a huge piece of property.
Have we done enough wetland studies to know if we have 250 contiguous acres, if we don't have to, without some type of wetland mitigation?
So the natural resource inventory is underway now. We should have that finalized. Timmons is doing it on the behalf of the EDA early February, so within the next week or so. That will really identify where those particular facilities are. You can see on here though that there are RPA throughout the property, and so while there are contiguous sites, there certainly could be in the future some sort of impacts to some of those, and that's not unusual. Again, it's just trying to avoid and minimize those the best that you can.
And if I could just interject on that too, because I think that's a good topic, is that 250 contiguous acres anywhere, in Chesterfield is hard to have no wetlands mitigation arise as a topic. The goal is to mitigate, and the desire is to negate the acreage that would be associated with that. But 250 acres is a large contiguous parcel.
There's been a lot of confusion, and Mr. Real, I think to this point, this is just one of those where we did not do a good job of communicating out what I-2 means and what those uses are. So we've tried to simplify it here and say that these are the only uses that would be allowed on the property. So it's these 8. I would note that, again, the two that have caused some concerns are pharmaceutical products manufacturing and plastic products manufacturing. I will also say that relative to plastic products, the idea is not that this would be a plant manufacturing raw plastic, but that if it was, and I don't have my laptop, but that's what I usually use by example. If Dell was there, they could not only manufacture computer equipment, but they could also make the plastic cases that contain that equipment. So it's not necessarily that there would just be a plant making sheets of plastic, but more that it would be permitted. So that might be one that, for example, we include as one of these accessory uses, just like we did contractor's office, machine shop, and warehouse. Again, the idea is not for this to be a large construction or laydown area or Amazon distribution center, but we do recognize that, again, a computer manufacturer will have some warehousing. Some of these facilities may have some yard, some outside storage, that sort of thing, but it should not be the primary use by any means. As someone who was here when Metaville was done and when Amazon was built, we certainly understand that was, a great ad for the community, has been really a good partner, but that's not what we're looking for here relative to distribution centers. That's not the right fit, and I think you heard Jason also speak to that for VDP. There are lots of uses that could go into these sorts of facilities, but not all of them are a right fit for the community.
There's also been some requests for, sorry, Mr. Chair, it's okay to speak.
It's all right, Mr. Engel, you go right ahead.
Thank you. There's also some other uses that have been requested, and I don't know we don't know until we know where the wetlands are and how the property could be used, but would that preclude uses such as a hospital or some type of town center being included in the area, and will we need to proffer those in somehow as conditional use or something to I-2 if we were to allow those types of uses?
Libby, I don't think I included. Let me back up a little bit. I did not mention this, and I should have. So we did end up adding a CUPD to this case in order to permit a fire station, as well as a water tower. Those were other things that came up throughout the conversation. So we said, you know what, we're going to go ahead and add those. Town center retail uses, some of those may be appropriate. We would have to see how the application would need to be adjusted to do that. From a staff perspective, we're not entirely sure that this is the right spot for any sort of town center use. We have other spots, for example, along Hull Street, there at Cosby Village that might be better suited for that sort of mixed use, residential, retail, commercial uses.
We just need to make sure we're working through all of that, even though it's not necessarily part of this case, it's part of this case.
Sure.
And let me just add to that. I mean, just speaking as a Clover Hill representative and looking at the county from 50,000 feet, I mean, we do have other places for retail, and other discussions have been had over the years about other locations for a town center type place. Center Point is a place that has been mentioned several times. We have other locations. There's certainly location in Roseland and in Leslie's district in Midlothian. And so when I just look at the opportunities, this case is not the be-all, end-all for a town center. That can still happen. But from my just discussions with people who would put one of those together, they're looking broadly at a 5 square miles, if you will, around a location to see what heads on beds look like, what the investment in infrastructure looks like for appropriateness for putting something like that in place. And certainly when you look at places like our Chesterfield Town Center that has gone through ups and some downs, and we've been right there with them, we know that retail is struggling, and that to have full support for it, that metric has changed over the years as a result of how people are purchasing goods and how those goods are ultimately getting to them. Amazon's a great example of that as a disruptor. So we just have to keep all that in mind, I think, from a commercial and a town center perspective. That's just one man's opinion. I'll go back to being chair now.
If it's okay, if you look at this map, I did want to also remind folks that Magnolia Green itself, the Magnolia Green proper, has a very large retail center. This is old, so please forgive the yellowing of the map. But in conversations with Tom Page over at iStar, he really does want to have a very nice non-residential commercial facility with some local restaurants, things like that. But they're not quite at that tipping point, he feels like, where they could really do that. So it'll probably the last thing that shows up. But they are also being very patient, because he wants it to be really an amenity for not just Magnolia Green in general, but also for the community as a whole. So.
Dr. Yes, Mr. Carroll.
I think to Mr. Winslow's point and Mr. Engel's point, when you look at the western part of Hull Street, and we'll talk about now just the section between 288 and Woodlake, and then 288 to Otterdale. So from 288 and 360 to Woodlake, it's 3.3 miles, to Otterdale 4.3 miles. We have almost probably 60, 70,000 people that are living out in this area. And just in Matoka, in the last 10 years, we had an increase of about 14,500 people. My point about this is they're all using the same place to shop right now. They're all going to the same Walmarts, they're going to the same steakhouses, the same restaurants that are out there. And that necessitates trips. And when the two number one selling communities in the Richmond region for the last 2+ years are Harper's Mill and Mag Green, those trips are coming east to get to these locations. They're not going west. And one of the things in the future that has to be considered is actually moving some of those amenities out west, like you're talking about with the land that iStar has, so that those trips don't have to go east. And those trips really happen, I mean, certainly in the peak hours. In one of the traffic studies that I read, certain sections in AM and PM peaks are already failing in Hull Street. And that's mainly because of the increased population out there. But the part of the way you mitigate that, to do exactly what we're talking about, which is you put those restaurants and things further west, so less people are going in that same little bottleneck, so to speak. And so I know that there are other properties that are out further west that eventually, but quite frankly, when you get past Mag Green, that's it. Because once you drop off on the other side, it's going to require water and sewer. So just a point I wanted to make, Mr. Chair.
Dr. Casey.
And I think these are very appropriate conversations. In fact, one of the things I think that even came up in the Westerly Summer Lake community meeting is maybe just even getting some small citizens group of the types of retail, restaurants, things that they would like closer to them, even specific types of entities, so that they don't have to drive 20, 30 minutes for those attractions. And again, I think it's worthy of us looking at who can be expert advice and helping frame this topic better for the Magnolia Green property or other frontage property along 360. I do think retail itself, if it was being embedded into the Upper Magnolia West, it goes back to what the state and feds that will help you with. They do not help you with road improvements if it's a retail project. Unfortunately, they don't even help you if it's a hospital-related project. They really want the I-2 type uses that you've seen here to get them to the table with their funding resources. And so, but I do think that there's leakage, if you will. It's leakage that's mostly staying in the county, but it is leakage from that area and the socioeconomic factors there that I think if we invest a little bit of our time and money and attention, we can position that private property and let them do what they do best, and we can maybe help find them types of prospects to come there. Having said that, most of the retail nowadays that you see arising usually has a residential component and a mixed-use component to it. So, you've seen across the region where properties that were once zoned 100% commercial that have sat idle for so long really almost need to have some embedment of residential, because that's the business of how somebody makes money in developing it privately. And we have traditionally not incentivized the residential side of the equation. We can work towards models of incentivizing the commercial side.
Thank you. Any other comments from board members? Mr. Smith, you can continue.
Thank you, sir. Did want to just show you some pictures of a development of obviously is a good go-by, successful story for the county, Meadowville Technology Park. Just an example of the campus-style development as well as the architecture. This is a real building. This is Medline. So they distribute medical supplies, equipment, masks, for example. But a very nice add to that. And if you stand outside of it, I can assure you there's no noise, there's no smell, there's nothing. It's very quiet. So the idea, again, would be that there would be similar facilities within this particular area. One of the current proffered conditions is that there would be a master plan for the entire site. That's very similar to what was done with the Meadowville Technology Park, so that dictates things like landscape, architecture, ensures that you have a quality development. And again, that's what we want to emphasize here. The east side, so this is the one that really includes the public facilities and potential residential development. We've talked about this a little bit, but just to recap, it could potentially be 3 schools, middle school, high school, elementary school, a maximum of 600 residential units. Those would be R15, which is either similar to or larger than the adjacent subdivisions or subdivision of Westerly. And it's approximately 600 or 700 acres in total. You can see we've already been to this slide. We've marked it up a little bit, but that's a good thing. I think there's been a lot of discussion again on the school sites. I think we've made some good progress there, and hopefully have resolved some of the concerns over the widening of Westerly Parkway. But again, more work to do relative to the high school location and what happens there. Any other questions for the board on Upper Mag East? I know we spent a good bit of time on that, but anything else that's kind of burning there?
To reiterate, thank you, Mr. Chairman. To reiterate, you mentioned 600 single-family homes. Is that what you mentioned? Is that the
Yes, sir.
max,
That would be a
for
maximum.
the entire area? For the entire area?
Yes, for both cases, but they would all
Both
be
cases.
Potentially located just on the east side. The west side would not have any residential. The idea being that you could, again, see this 200-foot buffer from the Powhite. We wanted to separate residential uses from the technology park the best that we could. So the Powhite serves as a dividing line between those.
Okay, very good. And also regarding the schools, you mentioned about moving the schools, high schools, middle schools. Is it envisioned, have we contemplated whether there will be students, and when we build schools, we're building for students, where will the students come from relative to other schools in that region, such as Cosby and other schools? Do we envision any redistricting? Has that been contemplated by schools relative to this project?
Yeah, that's one I'll have to defer to the schools folks on.
Okay.
So if it's okay with you, Mr. Holland,
Sure.
we'll have some folks follow up with on that question.
Yeah, we need to look at that.
Mr. Chair, if I could comment, I think
Yes.
that there's an anticipation those conversations will take place at liaison as we
Liaison.
move forward.
Very good.
And have some community conversations about what schools' expectations are. I do think it's on their radar as to not just this, but the other rebuilds that are currently happening, expansions in a different footprint. So I think that's a great opportunity for schools to be able to bring that forward.
Excellent, very good.
And Mr. Holland, you did ask about trails. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Engel. Mr. Holland, go ahead.
Yeah, you were talking about trails.
Yes, I did want
parks.
to note that that's kind of what you see
the-
on
and the
here,
comp
are
track.
these darker lines trying to show where trails could go, and then obviously we'll have to figure out a way to get under the Powhite Parkway to Horner Park. But the idea being that some of these trails will be located adjacent to the residential areas, but also very close to the school, but in those environmental areas that we could, so folks could have a trail facility.
Yeah, I can imagine that there will be a lot of biking, which is encouraged outside activities, so that would be certainly something significant to consider and have contemplated up front, including the chapter in our comp plan that relates to bike and trail paths. Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Engel.
Thank you. I have had several people send me questions on whether or not we have to rezone for schools, and what that process could look like, whether it goes through this zoning process or some other format. Can you explain that?
Sure. So we discussed this pretty early on when we discovered that we were going to move forward with the reliever school for Tomahawk Creek, the middle school. So you could have gone through a couple different processes. One is substantial accord. So state code requires that that any public facilities be determined to be in substantial accord with a comprehensive plan. That's a process that is really governed by the Planning Commission, but then the board would then accept that report. For all intents and purposes, to Joku Public, it looks exactly the same as a zoning case. It has a staff report. There's a public hearing at the commission level. Staff really produces a very similar, if not identical, report. So the thinking back then was, look, if we're going to go through all this, let's go ahead and fix this thing, because I think from a staff perspective, at least, we all recognize that there are challenges and issues with the existing zoning of the 1,300 plus residential units. I think we've heard loud and clear that there's not a desire to have that much residential out here. So if we were going to go through the mechanics of either a zoning or a zoning light process, it made a lot of sense to go ahead and fix it all in one fell swoop. So this is a slide I think we should spend a good bit of time on, because I know staff has spent a lot of time, and the commission has. Again, did want to give kudos to Steve Donahoe from planning, who immediately following a long work session with the commission about a week ago, followed up that week with in some cases, multiple hours with each individual commissioner to really get to what all of their concerns were, so that we could work hard on addressing them. Some of these you're going to see mirror the concerns of the community, which is no surprise. Some of them honestly come up simply from the experience of individual commissioners. You guys know this, but I'm always proud to say that Gloria Fry was a longtime land use attorney. She is one of the best in the business, always has been. We rely on her to really help think of things that staff doesn't. Mr. Engel, in your district, Mr. Sloan has been through a lot of cases, none quite this large, but a lot of industrial, as you know, within Bermuda. So he has a vast wealth of experience that we are frankly taking advantage of in terms of using his knowledge and time, and having gone through these before, to say, what are we missing? What could we do better? So, and then again, Tommy and Frank and Laquan, all a little newer to the commission, but each, I think, chiming in with some good ideas and making sure that this will be the best case it is by the time it gets to the board. So,
Just to follow up on that, because I know my planning commissioner wants to make it very clear that the planning commission is independent of the board of supervisors, and that they are evaluating this case independently of us. And he does have a lot of experience, and I do know he is sharing questions, and that you're working to answer those for him. But I just wanted to make sure that we make it very clear that they are independent of us, and they do not make a decision based on what we tell them to do, that they absolutely are evaluating the case themselves.
Mr. Ogle, that's a very important point too. I think that we do want to honor the process itself, and this is before the commission right now. So again, to the degree that we can talk about these, we don't want to do disservice to the commission and get to an end game before they've had a chance to have a public hearing. But again, to the degree we could update the board on where this is headed, to echo your sentiment, I could assure you that the commission we'll make sure this is vetted properly, and that there are appropriate protections for the community while the case is moving forward. So again, you've heard this theme a couple different times: buffers and setbacks. We are developing that map to show where those buffers would be. We are looking to increase those buffers specific to those residential areas, those acreage properties along Mosley and possibly Duval. So we will work with the commission to address that one, and I think we have some good ideas there. The other one that commission has brought up, and I think we should discuss a little bit, is the need for more conceptual plans. So again, you see the idea of the 200-foot buffer, 500-foot setback, a ring road concept, access points. That's a really important one for residents that live along Mosley. They have concerns, well, will I have a massive commercial driveway across from my home? So we want to make sure we look hard at that and ensure that the access points are in locations that are appropriate not only for the development, but also for the community, as well as our public safety folks, so that, that there's adequate access into and out of the site, particularly as it pertains to schools. So that's one we're going to take a harder look at. The idea of land bays, I think this is an interesting one. The commission has suggested that maybe for some of these uses that maybe the committee has expressed some concerns over, i.e. pharmaceuticals and plastics, perhaps those should be located more centrally to the site. And the area kind of on the outside of the property might be better suited for uses that like perhaps research and development, offices, data centers. The ones that are closer to homes might need to be a different sort of use. So again, we'll get into this with the commission and work through them, but it's an interesting concept and an idea that certainly may address some of the needs of the community. And lastly, we relative to that, we want to make sure that we're limiting any uses that are occurring outdoor. This came up in detail, for example, on the Carvana case. There were lots of discussions about ensuring that the roll-up doors were always down when there was any sort of work being done. We want to make sure that the sound, any of those noises are mitigated to the best degree possible by providing indoor uses at all, whenever possible. Mr. Engel, again, this was one that Mr. Sloan brought up in the work session, and it merits a lot of discussion. And I think you touched on a little bit relative to lighting, but there's a suggestion that we should adopt some performance standards for light, noise, odor, building height. So those will be things that we work on over the next 30 to 60 days with the commission. But certainly you are correct also that the ordinance does establish a maximum foot candle level at property lines. It's a little bit of an outdated ordinance, so there might be a better way to do that. So then that would engender a proffered condition above and beyond the ordinance. There are you could go with dark sky compliant, you could go with fully shielded fixtures. There are all sorts of ways to improve that. So that's certainly something that we're going to take a hard look at with the commission. Noise, again, there are ways to do that. You could specify decibel levels, pre and post construction, pre and post clearing, similar to what was done as part of the Carvana case. I think they're having learned from that, there might be a better way to do that. And again, we will work through that with the commission. Odor is a tough one. It's hard to say it's hard to measure that. And we certainly understand the concerns of the community, and we can't be the only ones that have run into this. So we're going to see if there are other cases throughout the country, and maybe this is one where Jason could help us to say, here's what was done in a different part of Virginia or a different part of the country where there were concerns with some of these other emissions, and certainly if there's a way to suggest a proffer, that's something we're going to work through.
Chair.
Yes, Mrs. Carroll.
I really think that's important for us to look into, especially when we look at different types of companies to come here. We're not reinventing the wheel. These companies already exist. They already have manufacturing plants or businesses somewhere else. And the proof certainly should be there, whether or not they're a good steward to the community. And quite frankly, if we do our homework right, we should be able to provide that information to the community to show. And that could be in the way of talking with not just the elected officials and business partners in those communities, but the people who actually live in the community as well. And I think there's a way that, quite frankly, we could do that and be very transparent about that. Mr. Chair, thank you.
Yes, Dr. Casey.
And if I could just echo as well, one of the things we're doing, and these desired and targeted companies that we would want to come here, is understanding what was the land use and conditions of where they eventually landed, and there may be actually conditions that we're not even thinking of that also work to protect the community, and if so, then if it worked in having these companies be successful elsewhere, then that's something for us to consider. Now, on the other side of the spectrum, if there's a condition or something that we're imposing, that these desired companies that we know will be good stewards would not come here because of a condition, we have to just, again, work with VDP and site consultants, understand all of that, so we just know what we're writing in our words, that it is not something that's going to, the last thing we want to do is go through all of this effort and have one word amongst this entire case that mitigates or negates anyone from wanting to come here.
Again, the last one on here is building height. That one's relatively easy to limit. Then the question just becomes, well, what's the right height? What's too tall? What's not tall enough? To Dr. Casey's point, you don't want to, put a limit on there that's going to then hamstring any development from actually occurring. So it needs to be the right fit. Some of that, obviously we've talked about doing things like balloon tests or renderings to show, well, Joe Q. Public standing on the road would never be able to see it if it's X height. And we'll certainly work through those things to ensure that, that to a large degree that any buildings would be located, for example, centrally, obviously could be higher, but the ones at the outskirts perhaps maybe not as much. So we'll work through those issues, and that's not quite as difficult as some of the others. A desire to further limit uses. We've touched on that a little bit in terms of either limiting the uses or limiting uses, that maybe are have a little more concerns to locations, again, that are more central to the property. Perhaps ones that are more adjacent or closer to residential would be limited to, again, offices, data centers, that sort of thing. But again, we will have those discussions. Another option could be, for the example, we talked about plastics only being as an accessory to electronic components manufacturing. So you could build a full laptop instead of just a motherboard. Utilities uses proffer. Again, we need to note that there are, again, we have the water tower and some other utilities that will occur on the site. We will add some of those, and we also require mandatory water and wastewater connections out here. There won't be things that would be discharged into streams and that sort of thing. We'll make sure that's codified in writing. Again, this was a conversation that came up a few minutes ago. Are we treating ourselves the same as we would a privately initiated zoning case? I would say from a zoning perspective in a community meeting, the answer to that is certainly yes. We've had multiple community meetings, continue to have work sessions. We'll have another work session, another community meeting next week, another work session with the Planning Commission, and then again, their public hearing would not be until March at the earliest. So it is following a very similar timeline. In terms of the level of detail, there's a little bit of difference there.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Ms. Hill.
So I just want to stop you for a second, Mr. Smith. So when you say, just like a privately initiated zoning case, we haven't seen a staff report yet. Planning Commission hasn't seen a staff report yet, right? So I think it's really important our citizens recognize that these conversations that are going on is a listening opportunity for all of us, and that what we're seeing here and what you're presenting to us right now is coming back as a result of those conversations through our planning commissioners who have been, attending and out there in the community and talking to say, this is what we're hearing, these are the concerns we're hearing. We need to be looking at conditions or expectations in this staff report that hasn't been written yet, right? So I know I'm trying to simplify this, but I am trying to simplify it because I was trying to sort of just slow down exactly what you're saying and say, folks, this is we're still in those early stages. And, once we start to see the staff report, which hopefully then we're going to see more specificity on all of these issues, we're going to have a much better detail of where we are.
And to your point, Ms. Haley, I think one of the things we will do is, again, go back through each of these issues at some point and say, here's how we were able to address that. Proffered Condition 7 says that building heights shall be no more than X. So we want to be able to, at the end of the day, circle back and say, these were the issues that were brought up by the community, here's how they're addressed, here's what was brought up by the Planning Commission, here's how those were addressed. And then that would be before you at some point for a public hearing. Should you all have any separate concerns above and beyond that, then certainly we would look to address those as well. Did want to speak to it. This is a little bit different than a private zoning case, again, because it is somewhat of a prospective zoning. There's nothing, at least at this point, for the west side. So trying to get it set up again to go, to harken back to Jason's speech, the tier 2 to tier 3 to really set it up. So there are some question marks there, and it is difficult to provide that same level of detail. But to the degree we can, I think we're going to work with Garrett's folks and try to see what else they can come up with to answer some of those questions about, is there a 250-foot or 250-acre site available? Look at some more of those details. And again, we'll provide those as moving forward. This is a good one. This is the idea of specifying what transportation improvements will be provided and when. This is a hard one. This is a very large case, and there is a laundry list of literally dozens of improvements to 20-some odd different intersections. Absent knowing what's coming in and what order it will be developed, it's very difficult to say what should happen first. The one assurance we do have is that the middle school will be developed first on the east side, so there are specific improvements tied to the middle school, as an example. To come up with a phasing plan for the entire 2,000 acres and for staff to just assume in what order it would develop in, that's going to be tough. But we do understand the request to ensure that there are at least certain major improvements. The one that has come up a couple times is we want to make sure that the Powhite Parkway is built prior to a certain level of development. So that's an example of one that we could probably come back with, okay, prior to development of, X number of square feet, Powhite Parkway should be in place. The hard part about that is solve for X. What's the right number? To echo, again, Dr. Casey's sentiment from a few minutes ago, you don't want to set an artificially low number that would then never permit the site to be developed. But also, understandably, folks have some concerns over, well, if you set the number too high, Powhite Parkway never gets built. So I think there's ways to get at that, but we're going to have conversations, and folks are going to be comfortable that there's that it's either the right number or the right plan is in place. I did want to also mention that, and I know Dr. Casey brought it up, but we do have, it's actually Laura Farmer is the CFO of VDOT, scheduled to come out in February to discuss Powhite Parkway and have conversations there. I think through discussions with RMTA, through some of our partners in that industry, we can, I think, get more granular and maybe provide some insight as to how to make that happen in the time and manner that the board wants.
Mr. Smith, I just say I was encouraged by our guest this afternoon. It seems that there is bipartisan support for infrastructure improvements, and so that's good to see, and will help us, I think, in these conversations as we move forward. Ms. Haley.
Mr. Chair, and just to add to that, this conversation about the Powhite extension isn't even a conversation until we're identifying opportunities like this. So, folks need to realize that, in the background, everyone's been talking about Powhite for forever, but we know the cost and the price tag attached to this. And so, we need partners at the table to make that happen. Those partnership conversations were not really ever happening until we've had, an opportunity like this. So I think that the fact that, no one can make exact promises or an exact timeline, but the fact that now there are willing participants and folks interested at every single level, including a national level, talking about, how and what needs to happen. And that infrastructure and that transportation is an absolute must, and I think everybody gets that. So I agree, we're going to have to be mindful, but also, candidly looking at what are reasonable terms to include that address this transportation issue.
Lastly on here, and I think Jason did a great job of covering this one, showing the benefit of having a shovel-ready site. I couldn't do it justice. He really did a good job. It was a great presentation to see, and I think all of y'all's questions were spot on. So I'll move to the kind of the final slide within the formal presentation, just to give some next steps.
Mr. Engel.
Sorry. Real quick, on utilities, I know we don't have an answer today, but one of the things that I was asked is if Dominion has to put in a substation, which they probably will to help service this area, would it be on-site, off-site? And I know we probably don't have those answers today, but if we could, as we're looking at utilities, take that into consideration and try to get an answer from Dominion as to what that looks like as well for the citizens.
Yes, sir. I think we could have that, if not for the meeting next week, then possibly for the planning commission work session, if that's okay. So speaking of which, you could see we are here. Board of Supervisors work session, January 26th. There is a community meeting scheduled here in the public meeting room February 3rd. That will be, we'll host folks live as well as virtual. This meeting, this room in particular is very well set up. You can see that there are cameras everywhere. It broadcasts very well in light of current situations. This room really is the best one to engage more folks. We have had a lot of success with folks attending virtually. Again, not precluding folks from showing up in person, but recognize that there are a lot of health concerns with doing that, and we could certainly accommodate, not quite an infinite number of people online, but everyone can watch from home should they want to and ask questions and that sort of thing through the virtual format.
My understanding, Mr. Smith, is that you're going to take questions from both those folks present on February 3rd and then questions from people online participating in that fashion. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that is. So we will, we've done this in a couple different formats, and I think it worked really well, but we will have it streamed through Facebook. So folks that want to comment with their questions, we can answer those in real time. We could also take questions from folks that are here in the room. It really is a format that has worked very well. I know we've done it on a few different projects, and folks are able to attend the meeting, from the comfort of their home and still ask questions.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes, Mr. Holland.
what is the estimated scheduled time for that meeting on February the 3rd?
We're looking at 7 p.m., Mr.
7
Holland.
p.m. Very good. That's important to make sure so citizens are aware of when and they can time in it however they desire.
Ms. Haley.
Mr. Chair, I think it's also important that we recognize, I know that we've had some concern noted about the fact that we're holding this in a public meeting room, but I think that there's also some noted concerns that, to date, we have really focused on trying to reach out to the direct community that has been involved. And the rest of us on this board are now hearing and having interaction as we have spent a lot of time sending out messages and answering questions from the rest of the constituents of the county, because this project is really a county-wide project. And so I think that being a definite plus to allowing folks then that opportunities that exist both through an active and engaged online resource as well as the opportunity to come into the room. But I think it's also really important that folks recognize that this is, again, an opportunity for them to ask questions and gain information. But as this moves forward, they're going to have an opportunity in a public hearing before the Planning Commission and an opportunity before this board in a public hearing to actually, state at that point in time what they want us to hear regarding their noted opinions at that point in time. And so I would ask that folks try to be mindful of sending us information and sending us comments as they see it come out, but trying to be open-minded to a formalized opinion until we can see what that staff report looks like and what we can see, as this gets put before the Planning Commission, what the finalization of this or close to finalization of this starts to look like. Because it's kind of like we're still forming the product, right? We're still forming the plan, and, while we like and appreciate their input, you know, it's not done yet. The clay is not completely molded yet. So, you know, being open-minded about that, I think, is really helpful to the end result, to the end product.
Mr. Chair,
Holland.
I just want to reemphasize that point. I think that was so well made, and that is that this is a community public meeting where input is received, shared, and discussed. And toward the comment made somewhat earlier, it's never final until this board votes. This is the governing body of Chesterfield County. Once this board votes, then it becomes final, but only until then. So it's open meeting, and of course, and I think it's so very important too, and this is I've seen over many years. Sometimes people have partial information, but make a final decision. It's so important to wait, to listen, to see, and not prejudge a decision about what should be, but be open-minded, and of course, get all the facts, all the information, and then evaluate it versus just sharing with someone an opinion. I've seen it in too many cases throughout the county in too many years, how misinformation can be shared. And we know from other areas, I need not to say regarding the vaccine, how misinformation can really cost someone their life. And that's tragic. That's the true tragedy, is that some people receive misinformation and never receive all the information, and therefore making a valid and thorough, well thought out decision. So let's be open-minded and think through where we are, and feel free to ask questions about anything, but be open. Thank you.
Thank you for those comments, Mr. Smith.
Just wanted to point out, so we have the community meeting on the 3rd, so that's one, and then the 2 public hearings. So potentially at the Planning Commission and then at the board. So there's really 3 separate opportunities for additional community input, 2 of which are formal public hearings. So wanted to point that out. Again, the earliest the Planning Commission would be March, so that the earliest the board could hear this is in April. The staff report we will endeavor to get out as soon as we can prior to that Planning Commission public hearing. You know, we typically have that out no less than a week prior to that. But we understand that there are lots of questions. So if people have questions prior to that we can answer, please just reach out, and we will do that. Did want to, in closing, point out I think Dave Good is here somewhere, but Dave and his group at Constituent Services have been huge as this project has moved forward in terms of just answering questions, scheduling these meetings. So did want to recognize him and Ashley Gibson, who have done yeoman's work in really making some of this come together. So with that, I'll close, and happy to answer any questions at the end.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Thanks to staff for staying on top of this and helping us to engage citizens throughout the process. That's very, very good, Madam Clerk.